Corey Evan. Coming up in this edition of the SHR Weekender. It's the end of an era in both Saudi Arabia and Yemen. I review the key points of this year's State of the Fart address and why it matters to you. Two men took selfies on a stolen iPad leading to their arrest in Crime and Pinheads. This week's rotating segment is the Wheel of Misfortune, and this month's theme is Lawmakers. And this week's tip of the week is all about extreme couponing. So guys and gals, go ahead and put your feet up. The SHR Weekend starts now.
Making sense of the week's news and the most of your weekend. From Southern California, this is the SHR Weekender with Corey Evan.
Happy weekend to you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Corey Evan. This is the SHR Weekender. We thank you very much for tuning in for the second time. Seriously, I owe you guys for tuning in a second time. It means a lot to me. But before I get sentimental about the whole thing, we better smash right into it. Our top story comes to us from CNN. The late Saudi monarch King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, try saying that 5 times fast, assumed the throne in 2005, but had effectively been running the kingdom since his half-brother King Fahd's stroke a decade earlier. His 2 decades at the helm of one of the West's key strategic allies in the Muslim world left an indelible, if ambiguous, legacy. CNN points out 5 of the most notable characteristics of his reign. Hopes were high that Abdullah's reputation as a modernizing reformer would translate into gains for women in the ultra-conservative kingdom. That's key number 1. But in the face of deep-seated cultural opposition to change, aka Sharia law, the progress was less than expected, according to CNN's senior international correspondent Nick Robertson. The second one, supposedly, cracking down on Al-Qaeda. The 9/11 attacks on Saudi Arabia's key ally, in which 15 of the 19 attackers were Saudi, were an inflection point for the kingdom. Abdullah lobbied for the removal of U.S. troops who had been stationed in the country since 1990, a prime grievance for the September 11th attackers, then set about bolstering its military with $150 billion to spend. Of course, now Saudi Arabia faces a threat from ISIS on its border. Earlier this month, ISIS allegedly attacked a Saudi border patrol near Arar. The kingdom is building a massive fence along its border with Iraq in order to keep the militants out, this according to Robertson. The third one, they point out, one of Abdullah's greatest legacies has been his focus on modernizing the Saudi education system. Following a failed attempt in '79 by extremist insurgents to capture Mecca's Grand Mosque and topple the Saudi leadership, the kingdom responded by becoming even more conservative, said Robertson. This renewed Puritanism was reflected in the education system for 2 decades, until Abdullah began an ambitious program of modernization despite opposition from religious conservatives. Fourth, while Abdullah's legacy as a social reformer is up for debate, his achievements at economic reform are more clear-cut, at least they say. Besides his educational reform, the late king's other lasting achievement was in joining the World Trade Organization in 2005, integrating his country into the global economy. And fifth and finally, Saudi also lifted its international profile under Abdullah's rule, with the late king taking a strong role in regional and world affairs. Obama, in expressing his condolences, praised the monarch for his bold steps in advancing Middle East peace initiatives and for greater outreach to the international community. That said, if you ask me at least, any hope of there being any major change for freedom in Saudi with a new king is minimal at best. Next up from the New York Times, a full day after the president of Yemen and his entire government abruptly resigned, calm prevailed on the streets of the capital, even while it remained unclear who was in charge of this country of 26 million people. The Houthi militiamen who drove President Abdu Rabbu Mansour Hadi to step down continued on Friday to surround the presidential palace and other key points and appeared to consolidate control, patrolling the streets in pickup trucks. By the end of the day, with no one challenging their authority, because everyone's afraid to, they parked their vehicles on street sides and rested casually with their Kalashnikovs hanging loosely off their shoulders. The militia leaders didn't immediately make any official claim that they were moving to fill the power vacuum left by the president's resignation, although local news agencies reported that they were trying to form a presidential committee to govern the country. Mr. Hadi, along with his prime minister and cabinet members, stepped down suddenly on Thursday, saying they didn't want to be a party to what Mr. Hadi's supporters had called essentially a coup and Mr. Hadi was kept under what amounted to house arrest. In Sanaa, the capital, residents seemed to adopt a resigned, wait-and-see attitude, which unfortunately we here at SHR Media are going to have to adopt as well as we wait for developments in this developing story, and as soon as we get them, we will post them up on our Facebook page, facebook.com/SHR Weekender, and our Twitter feed, @SHR News Desk. Next up from Reuters, a senior U.S. diplomat in Cuba for negotiations on restoring long-frozen diplomatic relations met a group of dissidents on Friday seeking to underline Washington's concern over human rights, but irritating the island's communist government. U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Roberta Jacobson, the highest-ranking U.S. government official to visit the island in nearly 40 years, held a breakfast meeting with the dissidents a day after talks with Cuban government officials. The State Department said it was an opportunity for Jacobson to exchange views and hear their perspectives. But Havana has stressed that efforts to normalize ties should not be accompanied by what it sees as meddling in its international affairs. Cuban officials expressed concern beforehand over the planned meeting, a U.S. official told Reuters. The head of the Cuban delegation to the talks, Josefina Vidal, was dismissive at the meeting later. The Cuban government rarely comments on dissidents, and when it does, it often charges them with being unrepresentative of the population and puppets of the United States. But the issue of political freedoms was bound to be a point of friction. Cuban President Raul Castro has said that restoring ties with its old Cold War foe doesn't mean Cuba intends to give up its socialist principles. We could have told you that. In a statement on Thursday on the talks, the Cuban government said relations between the countries should be based on mutual respect and non-interference in international affairs. Nonetheless, Jacobson told reporters after her meeting with the dissidents that human rights and free speech were a priority for the United States. Of course, back in the U.S. this week, we analyzed the State of the Fart Address, mainly Obama's bottom 10 list of things that he wants to get done before he leaves office in 2017. First, about raising the minimum wage. Gallup last asked about raising the minimum wage in November 2013, and at that time 76% were in favor of raising it to $9 an hour. But despite this broad support, just 26% of Americans in 2014 said the minimum wage issue was extremely important. Secondly, he wanted to strengthen unions, which, as you know, over on the Evan Miller Report, me and Jason, we are not fans of unions. Having been part of unions in the past, we know they don't do crap these days. I mean, in the past, of course, they've done a lot to establish minimum wages and safe working conditions, but today, they just seem to be all about keeping themselves afloat. The third one is increased spending on infrastructure in order to create jobs. Where's he going to get the money for that? Ah, yes, number 4, reforming the tax code for the working and middle class. Obama says he wants to close loopholes that lead to inequality by allowing the top 1% to avoid paying taxes on their accumulated wealth. But of course, we all know that that's just going to discourage the 1% from making more money. The fifth one was authorizing the use of force against ISIL, but of course he's very vague on how exactly we're going to accomplish that. As I just mentioned, number 6 is lifting the Cuba embargo. Obama, in his State of the Fart address, referred to the Cuba policy as long past its expiration date. But of course, we all know that lifting the embargo on Cuba is always potentially dangerous because, as you know, Cuba is, naturally, a communist country. Number 7 is reducing carbon emissions. Oh, brother, pandering to the environmentalists again. I think we better move on, because I'm sure you're Number 8 is closing the Guantanamo Bay prison, but of course he didn't mention where they'd all go, so I'm not too keen on closing Guantanamo. Number 9 is congressional cooperation. Now that we have a conservative majority, that's going to become a lot more likely that they'll agree on both sides of the fence, but getting Obama to work with them, we all know that Obama's become a little more belligerent, and he's increasing his go-it-alone attitude, and I think we all know how that's going to end up. And number 10 is reforming the criminal justice system. But how exactly Obama's going to pull off any of the bottom 10 lists that he outlined is way beyond me. But one thing he has managed to do, he's already got the FDA working on a new Obamacare calorie count requirement for restaurants. To which Domino's Pizza responded earlier this week, specifically Lynn Little, the executive VP, said the Obamacare mandate to count and post calories of served and sold food is impossible. Of course, that's expanding on already in-place requirements to post calorie counts on the menus. Little was quoted as saying, quote, "Essentially, we think this rule is a kind of disaster for everybody. Not just pizza, but restaurants, and anybody that's going to fall within this law. It's still not workable. We no longer know what a menu is. It's really hard to interpret. Essentially, they're saying anything that a consumer can look at and make a potential ordering decision from is a menu." She said this could apply to flyers, ads in the newspaper, or signs in the window. Of course, earlier this week on the Evan Miller Report, you probably heard me proudly supporting them on their decision to fire back at the federal government over this. Over some Domino's in Congress, I salute you!
Yep, I actually ordered pizza from Domino's earlier, and I've been planning this all day.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we don't usually get biased on this program, but today I say to Corey Evan, yeah, good job going for the Domino's pizza. Well done, sir. Yeah, why didn't you get me a piece?
We're in different studios.
But
I can, mail you a gift certificate or something, if that makes you happy.
Yeah. One of the disbenefits of being in two studios here. For any company to speak out against the government deserves my round of applause. I know how many calories are in pizza. A lot. But of course I work a 9 to 5 on top of doing this show, so I kinda need the calories. Obama, don't tell me what to eat. I'll eat what I want. I'll have a salad every once in a while, or an applesauce, or a banana. I'm fine with having fruits and veggies in my diet. Don't tell me how to enjoy it. Please. And on that note, it's time to wrap up our general news with the segment I like to call Crime and Enhance. As you know, this is where I do a wrap on the dumbest criminals from around the world, starting with one from the Washington Post. Beware of the cloud, potential criminals, for it can lead to your demise. Authorities say 2 men earlier this month stole an iPad and about $5,000 in cash from a car in Houston, and then headed to Burger King, where they took a bunch of selfies and filmed themselves with the stolen goods. "Hello, America," one of the men states on camera. "This, my good people, is what we get from a good night's hustle." He is then shown holding up a wad of cash. Harris County Precinct 1 Constable Alan Rosen told the Washington Post, quote, "What they didn't know, and they weren't technologically astute to know, is that, of course, goes to iCloud when you do that." Local media picked up on the video and images after the theft, and on Wednesday night a police officer spotted one of the men. Dylan Thompson and Dorian Walker were subsequently arrested on charges of felony theft. Thompson told police that he was actually planning to leave the state this week, Rosen said. Given their age, Rosen assumed the 2 suspects would have been tech-savvy enough to know that the images are automatically uploaded to the iCloud, which has become a useful tool for theft investigations. Rosen said it's the first time he's encountered an alleged crime involving the cloud, but I assure you, sir, it won't be the last. Our next one sounds like it came straight out of the Broadway play Pal Joey. Scotland Yard police described Douglas Stewart as an inveterate gambler. When he was banned from his betting shop, Stewart reportedly tried to hold up the local bookies. This according to NBC News. Police said Stewart glued Kleenex to his face as a hold-up mask. Ew. He also stuffed tissues inside his mouth to hide his accent. However, he scrawled his robbery demands on the back of a letter from the bookies, which banned him from the shop. He also took off his disguise outside the shop, where he was recorded by surveillance cameras. Stewart is going to jail for 44 months. And finally, out of Britain, from the Bolton News, a criminal forged a medical certificate in an attempt to escape punishment after failing to obey a court order. But when Gary Naylor handed the fake doctor's note over, his probation officer smelled a rat, and now he's been jailed for 6 months. Lindsay Thomas, prosecuting, told Bolton Crown Court that on July 30th last year, 21-year-old Naylor was sentenced to a 12-month community order for assault by Bolton Matt. But Naylor failed to turn up for several unpaid work sessions and, realizing he could be jailed for the breach, decided to forge a sick note. The court heard that Naylor used an old medical certificate belonging to his mom,
covering her details and adding his own, claiming he was unfit to work due to back problems. Sadler contacted a receptionist at the medical center where the certificate had been issued, who stated Naylor was not a registered patient there. And the doctor named on the certificate confirmed it was not her writing, and that her signature had been photocopied. So not only is Mr. Naylor a no-show, he also has very bad handwriting. Maybe you and I should spend some time together, Mr. Naylor. I can show you exactly what good handwriting is all about. And while I go off to show him that handwriting, we're gonna take a break. But when we come back, it's Common Core, gay marriage, and lethal injections in my update on our continuing battle against global socialism. A top New York lawmaker takes a spin on the wheel of misfortune. That and more is coming up after the break on the SHR Weekend.
Don't click away. The SHR Weekender will be right back.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
How you doing? John Grant here. When I'm not slaving over a hot microphone on the 405radio.com Saturdays at 10 a.m. Eastern, I check out Sean and Clint here at Sackheads Radio. We all appreciate the best political bloggers, writers, and commentators. We either get them on our shows or we make fun of them, as it should be. So check us out live Saturdays at 10 a.m. Eastern or forever on the podcasts on the 405radio.com.
This is Tammy Jackson, inviting you to join me on the Tammy Jackson Show every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Pacific on the 405radio.com. Put down that remote and tune into the show that covers politics, guns and the Second Amendment, religious liberties, sanctity of life, the military, and more. I host newsworthy guests and work hard to be a conservative radio show that's not like all the others. So save Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific for me, Tammy Jackson, on the 405media.com.
Here's radio.
You're listening to the SHR Weekender on shrmedia.com. Once again, here's Corey Evan.
And welcome back to the SHR Weekender. I'm Corey Evan, and now it's time to go into the latest in our continuing battle against global socialism. First up from the Tennessean, Senate Education Committee Chairwoman Dolores Gresham says she is committed to repealing Common Core in Tennessee a day after reports came out that she had changed her mind on moving away from the controversial education standards. Gresham has been one of the more outspoken senators in pushing against Common Core. Earlier this year, she introduced Senate Bill 4, which calls for the creation of Tennessee-specific standards. Let's just hope they don't end up writing standards that are anywhere near similar to common crap. Next up from the Huffington Post, a federal judge ruled Friday that Alabama's ban on same-sex marriage is unconstitutional. The judge, U.S. District Judge Cowley v. Grenade, ruled that Alabama's constitutional amendment banning gay marriage, known as the Sanctity of Marriage Amendment, violates the 14th Amendment's due process and equal protection clauses. The suit was brought against the state by two women, Carrie Searcy and Kimberly McNeend, who traveled out of state to get married in order to become the legal parents of their son. As a Mormon, I must say, it's hard to be engaged to be married anymore. And finally, from Reuters, the Supreme Court on Friday agreed to review Oklahoma's method of execution by lethal injection, taking up a case brought by 3 death row inmates who accused the state of violating the U.S. Constitution's ban on cruel and unusual punishment. The High Court just last week allowed the execution of a convicted killer to go ahead in Oklahoma over the objection of its 4 liberal members. The 3-drug process used by Oklahoma prison officials for carrying out the death penalty has been widely debated since the April 2014 botched execution of inmate Clayton Lockett, a convicted murderer, as he could be seen twisting on the gurney after death chamber staff failed to place the IV properly. The inmates challenging the lethal objection protocol are Richard Glossip, John Grant, and Benjamin Cole. Glossip is to be executed for having his employer beaten to death. Grant stabbed a correctional worker to death, and Cole is convicted of killing his 9-month-old daughter, which particularly makes me sick. So, will I be allowed to send my kids to school where they do not teach global socialism? Will I be allowed to teach my kids that marriage is between a man and a woman? And where can I get my hands on a bottle of Crystal Pepsi? Stay tuned for developments in our continuing battle against global socialism. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to take a spin on the Wheel of Misfortune! Yes, this week's rotating segment is called The Wheel of Misfortune, and basically this is where I sum up stories about public figures either A, doing something illegal, or B, just common unfortunate events. And this month, it's all about lawmakers, so let's take a spin on the Wheel of Misfortune and find out that our first unfortunate person is Sheldon Silver. USA Today reported this week that he was arrested on federal corruption charges, alleging he was involved in a multi-million-dollar kickback scheme for over a decade. Silver's arrest in Manhattan on a 5-count indictment put state business on hold, and it led to questions about how the state legislature would function under the cloud of his arrest. Assemblyman Barbara Lifton, a Democrat from Ithaca, New York, was quoted in the halls of the Capitol as saying, quote, "I'm shocked." Sure you were, but you shouldn't be, really. Federal prosecutors allege that Silver, the Speaker since 1994, was in a scheme since at least 2000 to defraud the public and use his power to obtain at least $6 million from 2 outside law firms. Prosecutors said about $4 million of that came in kickbacks from real estate developers and referrals in asbestos cases in New York City. He was arrested on Thursday morning, but posted $200,000 bail to get out. And amid a swarm of reporters, Silver was quoted as saying, quote, "I am confident that when all the issues are aired, I will be vindicated." Silver is 70 years old, so by the time he could be eligible to get out of jail, he might already be dead. Right, let's go for another spin of the wheel, and this time it lands on Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe. He vacationed with his family in Tanzania during the holidays, according to his spokesman, Brian Coy. He was hospitalized Monday as a result of a riding accident over the holidays. The governor has been working since his return from Africa, but Coy said doctors identified increased fluid around his lungs that required treatment. He was hospitalized at Virginia Commonwealth University Medical Center, Richmond, and was just released yesterday. The McAuliffe family went to Africa to visit the governor's daughter, who works for a non-profit, when a horse threw McAuliffe during a ride around Christmas Day. Coy didn't know what spooked the horse, although I'm sure my fiancée Jennifer can enlighten you on that one. And I think one more spin is in order here, ladies and gentlemen, and this one is going to land on, oh dear, it's Harry Reid. He says he's still on track to run for re-election next year despite the grievous injuries he suffered while exercising, according to Politico. In his first interactions with the Washington Press since the breaking of his ribs and facial bones on January 1st, the minority leader offered new details Thursday about the pain he suffered, disputed skeptics who doubted that his injury occurred during a workout, and refused to rule out legal action against the manufacturer of the exercise bands that failed. He said he hopes to be back at work within a week after his surgery on Monday at George Washington University Hospital. He appeared with a large bandage over his right eye and a bruise on his face, so obviously the snapped exercise band probably had something wrong with it if he didn't tamper with it. Always read the manufacturer's instructions, Mr. Reid, because that way you'll have less chance of it snapping on you. And down in San Diego, a very happy Jason Miller is listening to this and thinking, yes! And on that note, we thank you for taking a spin with us on the Wheel of Misfortune. After the break, Lonnie Love is in our Game Show News Minute, along with Meghan Trainor, Nick Jonas, Ellie Goulding, and Lionel Richie, apparently. You'll understand what I mean by those guys. Plus my tip of the week that could save you money on dining out. You're listening to the SHR Weekender, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Paul, a student at Hillsdale College. Here is my professor, Dr. Larry Arnn, on the separation of church and state.
America's founders believed in the separation of church and state, in that the country was not to have an official religion or an official sect. But that did not mean that government was to be hostile to religion, or even indifferent to religion, as many today argue. In fact, America's founding document, the Declaration of Independence, includes both a reference to God as the author of the laws of nature and a confident assertion that human beings are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Far from being hostile or indifferent to religion, America's founders understood the theology of the Declaration to be an essential part of the education of citizens.
This Constitution Minute was brought to you by Hillsdale College. To join the national conversation on the Constitution, go to constitutionminute.org.
Hi, this is Rooster from Outcry Radio. Catch me here on Blog Talk Radio every Saturday night at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or follow my blog. Now, back to the Sackheads.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to SHR Media.
I'm Corey Evan, the Game Show Geek. It's Saturday, January 24th, 2015. Here's your Game Show News Minute. World-renowned choreographer, performer, singer, and songwriter Paula Abdul and global superstar singer-songwriter dancer Jason Derulo will join Nigel Lythgoe at the judges' table alongside returning host Kat Deely for the 12th season of So You Think You Can Dance. The upcoming season will feature a new twist in the competition, stage dancers versus street dancers. So you think you can dance, eh? Prove it this summer on Fox. Season 8 of The Voice might already have its guest mentors selected. The NBC singing competition has reportedly recruited Meghan Trainor, Nick Jonas, Ellie Goulding, and Lionel Richie to assist its quartet of coaches for the show's spring run. Richie is the only musician of the four to have previously served as a guest mentor, so he's got a little bit of experience under the belt. What will they bring to the table on Monday, February 23rd on The Voice on NBC? You'll just have to find out. And Warner Brothers is shopping a remake of Love Connection that would be hosted by The Real's Lonnie Love, said several sources at NATPE this week. The show is a possible replacement for Let's Ask America, a game show that airs on several Scripps-owned stations. Should Scripps decide to pick up the show, it would likely begin as a slow rollout on a handful of stations, much like Warner Brothers' TMZ spin-off TMZ Live. A Warner Brothers spokesman said the company declines to comment on development. But I'll comment on this development. This is what you get, Let's Ask America, for not airing in LA, the entertainment capital of the world here. But I digress, ladies and gentlemen. That is your Game Show News Minute. Have a great day. Forgive me, ladies and gentlemen, when a game show doesn't air in LA when it ought to, I go bananas. And coconuts. And any other tropical fruit that you can throw my way. Gee, thanks for the sour persimmons, Buster. And speaking of food, this weekend you might probably be going out with friends to eat, but have you ever brought coupons with you at the restaurants? Yes, I'm keeping my tips of the week very simple, ladies and gentlemen. You probably already have seen coupons in your weekly mailers, mostly for fast food, but oftentimes you'll get coupons for the local diners or the big-name restaurants. Save them. Put them in your wallet. Bring them with you to the restaurants, because they all offer discounts on the foods you want to eat. Even if you're just going out for fast food, those chili cheese fries you get for $2.79, if you bring in the coupon, you could get them for $1. Imagine what you could do with the other $2. And don't be embarrassed to use coupons in front of your friends, ladies and gentlemen. As you know, these days, money's getting tighter and tighter, so you have to be brave with your couponing. Go extreme. Bring a coupon for every item, for heaven's sake. I'm telling you, it's a good idea, and your friends will understand in time. As a matter of fact, I've got a coupon right here, so I'm gonna go get me something to eat while it's still the lunchtime hour, and thus endeth the SHR Weekender for this Saturday, January 24th. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook.com/SHR Weekender, and be sure to keep up with the news as we tweet it to you at SHR News Desk. For all of us here at the SHR Media Network, I'm Corey Evan saying, have a great weekend or not, the choice is yours.
Corey will be back next weekend on the SHR Weekender. For more information on today's program, go to shrmedia.com. Thank you for listening.